When we think of Goa, the mind immediately goes to sun-drenched beaches and a carefree coastal escape. But move away from the shoreline and sit around a late-night campfire, and that idyllic safety gives way to something much darker. 3 years ago, a 19-year-old named Samarth was sitting around one of those very fires. Flush with the arrogance of youth, he was quick to laugh off local superstitions. So, when a friend challenged him to walk into a supposedly haunted location alone at night and snap a photo, Samarth accepted without hesitation. The target of this late-night challenge was the De Mello House. It's a sprawling, decaying piece of Portuguese architecture that locals deliberately avoid after dark. Samarth saw the rotting walls as nothing more than an empty building waiting to be explored. He failed to recognize the immense danger of treating a terrifying local legend as a simple playground for his own skepticism. The lore surrounding the property stems from its original occupants. Two brothers lived together under that roof, but their relationship curdled into an intense, consuming hatred that eventually boiled over. During a vicious argument, one brother drove a knife into the other, killing him instantly. To hide the crime, he dragged the body to the backyard and buried his brother in the dirt beneath a large tree. The surviving brother died under mysterious circumstances shortly after. According to the people who live nearby, the raw violence of that night tethered both of their souls to the property, locking them in an endless, bloody reenactment of the murder. As Samarth fired up his scooter and drove towards the estate, he assumed he was visiting an empty shell of a house. In reality, he was driving headfirst into an active spiritual battlefield. The moment his tires crossed the boundary of the property, the environment visibly shifted. The warm coastal breeze dropped to a freezing chill, and the ambient noise of the nearby jungle abruptly cut off into dead silence. Standing before the entrance, the sheer scale of the decay became apparent. The structure didn't look abandoned. It felt hostile, as if the hollow, shadowed windows were actively tracking his movements. Looming over the property was a massive tree, its thick, twisting roots literally swallowing the archways and violently prying the stone foundation apart. Looking closer at the trunk, the bark was covered in deep, jagged gouges. They looked exactly like human fingernails frantically clawing at the wood. The rotting wood and fractured stone of the De Mello property serve as a perfect physical mirror to the fractured, hateful minds of the brothers who lived there. Samarth pushed past the rusted gates and stepped into the main hallway. Instantly, a heavy, suffocating pressure slammed into his chest, forcing him to gasp for basic breaths. Then the smell hit him. A localized, overpowering stench of rotting flesh filled the corridor, thick enough to taste. He shined his phone's flashlight across the peeling wallpaper. Strange, disfigured cartoons were painted across the walls, and their eyes were entirely blacked out. As he walked, those dark voids seemed to pivot and follow him. Desperate to get the photo and leave, he opened his front-facing camera. There, glowing on the screen right behind his own reflection, stood two tall, featureless shadows. He spun around, but the hallway was completely empty. Between the crushing weight on his chest, the stench of decay, and the figures on his screen, Samarth's surroundings were no longer following the rules of the physical world. The house was effectively overriding his senses. The silence broke. Deep, guttural growls echoed from the far end of the dark corridor, followed by a piercing scream. Then came the heavy, violent thuds of two men brutally beating each other. Samarth gripped his phone tightly, but the screen abruptly died. His fully charged battery drained to zero in an instant, plunging him into total darkness. Panic took over. He sprinted for the exit, making it as far as the massive tree in the backyard before his legs completely locked up. A paralyzing force gripped his ankles, rooting him to the spot. He forced his head down to look at his feet. The ground had opened up into a 6-foot dirt grave. Lying at the bottom was a rotting, half-decomposed corpse, and the face staring back at him was his own. Before his mind could even process the impossible sight, he heard the fighting stop. He looked up to see two blood-soaked men staring directly at him. In that exact second, dead hands burst from the dirt below, grabbed his ankles, and violently dragged him down into the earth. The brothers' hatred had transcended time. Their cycle of violence had finally found a new target in the present. By 5:30 the next morning, the sun was rising, casting a safe, warm light over Goa once again. His friends, frantic with worry, finally reached the property and found Samarth unconscious, his body caked in thick, dark soil, lying outside the front gate. He was severely depleted. His chest was barely rising, and his friends had to frantically dig away the dirt packed around his face just to get him breathing again. When he finally woke and choked out the story of the grave and the rotting brothers, his rescue quickly turned hollow. His friends shook their heads, entirely dismissing his sheer terror as a bad hallucination or a severe panic attack. But as they helped him walk away, Samarth cast one final look back at the rotting Portuguese facade. There, standing dead still in the second-floor window, the two brothers were watching him leave. Samarth was staped to the physical grave, but he couldn't bring back proof for his friends. He left the property that day knowing that while he survived the de Mello brothers, he'd carry the weight of that night